Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the games of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. In this episode, we'll take a look at two games from the Mega Drive's newest third-party publisher, which also happens to be one of the oldest and most influential names in video games. Let's get started. Taito is the new third-party publisher, and their first game for the Mega Drive is a port of their 1988 arcade platformer, the NewZealand Story. In it, you play as Tiki, the only member of his Kiwi tribe to escape capture by Wally, a blue leopard seal. Taito, of course, is best known for kicking off the arcade craze of the late 70s and early 80s with its smash hit game Space Invaders, the machine that famously caused a temporary shortage of 100 yen coins in Japan. Taito was one of the most prolific developers around throughout the golden age of the arcades, with further hits including Kicks, Zookeeper, Elevator Action, Bubble Bobble, Darius, and Arkanoid. The NewZealand Story is a great example of an early platform puzzle game, where the goal is to navigate Tiki through multiple horizontal and vertically scrolling stages featuring a mixture of combat and straight exploration. Tiki is able to, and actually required to, hijack the various floating objects his enemies ride in order to finish each stage. This opens up a bit of strategy in that you need to aim precisely at your adversaries. Hitting their rides will normally destroy them and leave Tiki landlocked. Tiki will don a snorkel and mask periodically in order to make his way through water-filled mazes. I really like these sections, as they require you to move quickly in order to find air pockets that will replenish Tiki's oxygen supply. The Mega Drive port was handled by Visco Corporation, which had developed a few of Taito's arcade games previously. Interestingly, the Mega Drive version of NewZealand Story is not a direct port of the arcade game, but features remixed levels. This version was later ported back to the arcade and called the NewZealand Story Plus. The second game this episode brings with it the second new Mega Drive publisher of 1990, Asmik Corporation. Asmik was founded in 1985 as a subsidiary of Sumitomo Corporation, mostly to take advantage of the Famicom and the booming market it had created. Asmik never really set the world on fire, releasing a handful of middling quality games across multiple platforms. Most of the recognition it got in North America probably had to do with releasing a game called Boomer's Adventure in Asmik World on Nintendo's Game Boy, and then only because most people wondered what the hell an Asmik World was. The company also got into film distribution in Japan, which is what it's probably more famous for. Asmik's first Mega Drive game is Air Diver, developed by an obscure group called Coffee Assistant. At first glance, this game looks pretty damn impressive. Air Diver looks like some sort of Afterburner clone featuring a fairly detailed, if slightly screen-obscuring, cockpit view. Even when the game first starts, it holds a lot of promise. It appears to have that same pseudo 3D engine running most of the Sega arcade conversions on the Mega Drive. Then you pick up the controller and realize what you've got is pretty much a mediocre on-rail shooter. The player is only able to shift the nose of their F-119 stealth fighter a few degrees in any direction, fire guns and missiles, and manipulate their speed. Despite the fact that missions take place all over the world, each level looks very similar outside of the color palette. The one impressive bit is the screen-filling bosses. Unfortunately, I'm so bad at this game, I can't show you that much footage. The second of three shooters in this episode is also the second appearance by NCS and Messiah in 1990. Target Earth is probably the most unique shooter on the Mega Drive since Thunder Force 2. It features land-based and aerial combat using a mech that can fire in 8 different directions. It also features an ever-growing arsenal of weapons earned based on the player's performance in each level. The year is 2201, and man has developed technology that allows them to live anywhere in space. Suddenly, a mysterious cyborg army attacks Earth and her colonies. It's up to the Defense League to drive them back using their assault suit. Target Earth has become a bit of a cult classic in subsequent years, not only for its well-developed story and decent gameplay, but also for its brutal difficulty. Beating this game legitimately is sort of a badge of honor. That's also why I've used an invincibility code to capture footage of some of the later levels. And I have to say that Target Earth's reputation is totally deserved, both for the difficulty and quality level. The variety in the mission structure and weapon loadout here really makes the game stand out in the early Genesis library. If this game seems a bit familiar to any Super Nintendo gamers, that's not surprising. NCS created a spin-off for Nintendo's system which was brought to the US by Konami called Cybernator. It featured very similar gameplay and another brutal difficulty curve. Both Target Earth and Cybernator received sequels on their respective consoles, though neither of those games made their way west. Unfortunately for Asmik, mere days after their subpar 3D shooter hit shelves in Japan, Sega's latest AM2 arcade port hit as well, Afterburner 2. This is the 4th superscaler port for the Mega Drive, and definitely the most impressive from a visual standpoint. It's probably also the most popular arcade machine to be ported thus far. Afterburner 2 is very similar to the original Afterburner. The player flies into the screen for 21 stages of dogfighting action, banking and barrel rolling as they struggle to get the missile lock on attacking aircraft. The action is fast and furious, often to the point that you almost feel out of control. There's an intensity here that hasn't been seen on too many Mega Drive games thus far. Afterburner 2 adds throttle control to the mix as well, allowing the player to speed up and slow down as needed. This is mostly used to deal with new enemies that come up behind your fighter and take pot shots. Slowing down so they overshoot you and show their tailpipes will allow you to shoot them down. Strangely, this Sega game isn't published by Sega at all. Instead, the port and the publishing were handled by a company called Denpa Microsoft. Denpa were best known at the time for their ports of Sega and Namco arcade games for various Japanese computers. How or why they ended up publishing a Sega arcade game on Sega's console is a mystery to me. Microsoft was also known for its line of excellent joysticks, both for the PC Engine, Master System, and computers. In fact, they released what I believe is the very first analog gamepad in 1989, called the XE1AP. It was compatible with multiple consoles and computers, and Afterburner 2 was the first Mega Drive game released that supported it. Afterburner 2 was the only Mega Drive game Denpa Microsoft released, but the company didn't go anywhere. It eventually moved exclusively into the hardware arena, and even today produces gaming gear like controllers and boxes that upscale older game console signals to HDMI signals for modern televisions. Taito's second Mega Drive game is a port of its 1988 arcade game Final Blow. This is also the first boxing title in the Mega Drive's slowly growing library of sports games. Gameplay is pretty much what you'd expect. There's a button to control your right and left arms, as well as bringing up your guard. Different button and D-pad combinations result in different types of punches. The game is very straightforward. All you get is single bouts of up to 12 rounds and a selection of 5 different boxers. Truly an arcade experience. What's a bit more impressive is the sheer size of the characters. Once again, this sports game shows off the visual power of the Mega Drive relative to Nintendo's Famicom. I'm guessing that was Sega's original reason for bringing the game to the Western market. That, and that Final Blow filled another gap in their current sports roster. However, it also became a major player in Sega's anti-Nintendo advertising campaign. In 1988, Nintendo had released the extremely popular Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, featuring the dynamic and exciting world champion on its cover and in the game. It was one of the few examples of Nintendo licensing a sports personality for one of their games. It was also a brilliant move, as Tyson ended up becoming the youngest and one of the most dominant champions in history. So when 42-1 longshot James Buster Douglas won his title bout against Tyson on February 11th, 1990, by knocking the champ out for the first time in his career, Sega saw a major opportunity. Not only would it be licensing the current champion for its Genesis game, it would also be licensing the guy who upset Nintendo's sports poster boy. What a coup. Talk about Genesis doing what Nintendo don't. Remember that supposed cover curse I mentioned last episode? 8 months after his win, Douglas fought his first title defense against Evander Holyfield. Holyfield knocked him out in the 3rd round. Douglas immediately went into semi-retirement, remaining there until a near-death experience due to a diabetic coma. He made a brief comeback in the late 90s with mixed results, and finally retired for good in 1999. I'm not sure when James Buster Douglas boxing was released in North America, but at best, Douglas would have been champ for a couple months while it was on the market. Of course, Mike Tyson would go on to be convicted of rape and become one of the most unstable and controversial sports personalities in history. So maybe Sega did win this round. And that'll do it for this episode of Generation 16. Thanks for watching. Join me next episode when we'll be looking at the return of Sega's flagship role-playing game franchise. See you then.